Shouting is never how it starts. This is the reason why situations like this are so unnerving. The actual fracture does not happen overnight. The door is not knocked down by it. Silently, it enters the room, sits at the table, folds its hands, and waits. The atmosphere shifts when everyone senses it, but no one wants to give it a name. Even quiet becomes loud at that point. That's just how this felt. Something was shattered in the room before a single accusation was made, before anyone spoke out, before names were repeated, and before defenses began to pile on top of one another. The posture was indicative of that. In the pauses, you could hear it. Nobody appeared at ease enough to think this was simply another awkward family discussion, and you could sense it. It didn't seem petty. Unlike disputes on reality TV, where the tension is exaggerated and the emotions come right on cue, this one did not feel scripted. This felt heavier and older than the actual scenario, as if the talk had begun long before the cameras rolled and had already left wounds on all of the people at the table. Then Tamar talked, but not in a chaotic, tearful, or dramatic way to startle the listeners. She spoke as though she had seen this scene 100 times in her head, direct, regulated, and measured. And for some reason, that intensified the impact. Because people tend to ignore those who are emotional. They label them as impulsive, theatrical, and unstable. However, it hits differently when someone describes a severe hurt while sounding composed. It feels more like a record than an emotion. It's more like testimony than a breakdown. The room froze as a result of that. She wasn't merely ranting. She began naming the things she thought had happened to her. The vocabulary she was using to describe treachery was more terrifying than fury or certainty. There was no way for to push those words back into the shadows once they were said. The central claim was terrible since it affected more than just emotions. It had an impact on family loyalty, livelihood, trust, and safety. Tamar was not expressing a sense of exclusion. She didn't claim to have been misinterpreted. In essence, she was claiming that forces associated with those who ought to have shielded her were turned against her. A place where love and discourse ought to have resided had been invaded by that legal compulsion. And everything is altered. Because families quarrel, families let one another down. Families can say hurtful things and even pretend for years that the wounds are not as severe as they truly are. However, the disagreement takes on a different form when legal threats infiltrate a family's emotional bloodstream. It becomes more strategic and no longer feels like hurt feelings. It begins to feel powerful. The room changed so quickly because of this. No one actually considered the cease and desist as a minor miscommunication when it was brought up. That is among the most illuminating aspects of the whole conversation. When something seems ridiculous, people tend to brush it off. People typically vehemently dispute anything that is untrue. However, this was not that kind of reaction. Rather, the dialogue grew tense, defensive, and fractured. They asked about names. Accountability was hazy. The focus was diverted. And that type of response speaks for itself. An emotional story, not necessarily a legal one or evidence of guilt. Of course, because people's reactions to accusations frequently reveal their worst fears. And it wasn't just what Tamar had said that appeared to frighten everyone in the room. It was the next thing she could say. This is the detail that viewers keep returning to. Not only the charge but also the context in which it is made. Why did the space feel so cramped? Why did each sentence seem to be navigating a minefield? Why did some names seem to instantaneously make people feel hotter? Why did the energy seem more like containment than disagreement? These are the questions that escalated a single online altercation into a much larger one. Because when a family fights in front of the public on video, the behavior matters just as much, sometimes even more than the words. Yes, viewers pay attention to what is said, but they also see who interrupts, deflects, corrects, protects, grows anxious, and abruptly becomes untouchable. And in this instance, everyone surrounding the woman appeared more concerned with managing the frame than tending to the hurt, while others witnessed a woman attempting to drive buried anguish into the light. For this reason, many can't stop thinking about this scene. Even though it was accompanied by accusations, there was one very genuine cry at the center of it all. I needed you, but where were you? Beneath each crisp stroke, Tamar actually seemed to be asking that question. When anything significant occurred, where were you? When I felt trapped, where were you? When my identity, my job, and my tranquility were at risk, where were you? When I needed a sister more than a tactic, where were you? And legal distancing cannot be used to respond to that kind of query. Technicalities won't calm things down. Semantics cannot make it better. Telling someone to calm down won't make it go away. When someone says, "Nobody came to my defense," they are not just summarizing what happened. They're talking about desertion. One of the most profound traumas in a family is abandonment. Because of this, the situation felt unpleasant, even in spite of the details, the documentation, and the public drama. It had a worldwide effect. The fear of discovering that those you believed would keep you safe may have prioritized distance over defense, order over honesty, or image over connection. That fear is recognizable to spectators. The majority of people might never sit at a family table that is shown on television. Most might never be scrutinized virally. The majority of music may never deal with lawyers, public narratives or the reputations of celebrities. However, many individuals have experienced what it's like to be the only person in a room speaking the painful truth, while everyone else immediately becomes fixated on damage control, tone, timing, and phrase. This is what made the moment so powerful. It didn't feel like a single lady attempting to prevail. It seemed as though a single woman was no longer willing to be silent. And when that quiet broke, the topic of discussion shifted from what had happened to who had the authority to choose what might be spoken. The whole thing starts to seem eerie at that point, because quiet is rarely empty in families, particularly those that are defined by fame, wealth, public image, and long-standing unresolved wounds. Being silent can be loyal. Fear can be expressed in silence. Silence may indicate fatigue. Being silent can serve as guilt can come from silence. One tactic is to be silent. A prison might be silence. And there was a ton of it in this scene. Each pause seemed heavy. Each interruption felt deliberate. The emotional core seems to be obscured by every explanation. Rather than pausing to inquire, what specifically was sent? The room seemed to tighten around denial without completely denying, around distance without completely disengaging, and around correction without comforting. Rather than asking, "How did this affect you?" or saying, "Show us what happened so we can understand." The internet never leaves that kind of response unanswered. Due to the fact that audiences are pattern seekers, they observe responses rather than merely hearing assertions. They look for behavioral and verbal and speculation steps in to fill the void when they perceive a mismatch. Here, that is precisely what took place. 5 doors remained partially closed while one was opened. People also begin to develop theories when they are unable to obtain clarity. They go back in time. They study nonverbal cues. They draw comparisons between the present and past interviews, conflicts, public separations, and subtle insults that seemed insignificant at the time but now seem significant in retrospect. A pause from years ago feels significant all of a sudden. A chilly look feels heavy, and previous quiet begins to appear deliberate. A name turns into a symbol, and that's how a personal injury turns into a public storm. However, sadness is still the true emotional core behind all the ideas, because there was more to this than just a trip, filming, branding, or knowing who knew what and when. It was about a real-time collapse of trust. The legal lines weren't the most excruciating. These were the private ones. The persistent claim that nobody stood up for her. The pressure she felt to bring the issue to national television because private accountability had previously failed may have been exacerbated by the notion that someone with ties to her own family was involved. Consider how isolating that is. To believe that the public is the only remaining witness, should have the impression that the only object in the room that can't disturb you is the camera. To believe that everyone but you will shape the narrative of events that survives if you do not speak up now. That is a very specific kind of desperation, not dramatic or wild, but the desperation of someone who feels as though stillness is engulfing them. Her consistency was important for this reason. She didn't come across as speculative. She seems like a person with a lot of hurt inside of her. Someone who has made too many private connections to continue denying the existence of the image. Someone who had had enough of being assured that what seemed violent to her was either overdone, manageable, or typical. In families with a long history of imbalance, it is frequently what occurs. When someone says out loud what everyone else has silently decided to avoid, they become the problematic one. They become the problematic one. Hesitancy is what's making this look worse, she hurriedly said. It was enough to confirm many people's concerns, and this wasn't a coincidence. Fans were horrified. The family was split apart by intense emotions, and after everything they had been through, one close member reportedly wept out in shock. This was all premeditated. Another said, "It's not just about love anymore. This is about respect." And respect was exactly what Yandandi felt was slipping away piece by piece. When she finally decided to address the issue in public, she didn't hold back, but she also withheld some details. "I've been quiet because I needed to understand what was happening," she stated in a brief video, her eyes heavy despite her calm demeanor. However, silence should never be interpreted as a sign of weakness. Her deliberate word choice simply made her listeners more attentive. She was on the verge of losing it as that statement quickly gained popularity, was reposted again with subtitles, and turned into affirmations of support. "No, she's going to act sensibly," some admirers cautioned. Others said, that contrast was significant because, although everyone anticipated an emotional response, what they were seeing was far more deliberate. Mendeecees was under pressure from all the texts, side calls, and altercations, and there was no way out, and he began to lose confidence for the first time. "This is becoming unmanageable." "This ain't what I planned," Tamar said, crossing her arms with an enigmatic expression, to which he responded fiercely in a softer, more hesitant voice. "Now, What are you saying? Maybe we should slow this down, he continued. She glanced at him doubtfully, instead of confidently for the first time. Go more slowly. Do you believe they will slow down for us? I don't mean that, she retorted sharply, interrupting him in the middle of his explanation. No, you just didn't think it would get this real, she remarked as she got closer. You desired the emotion without the repercussions. He had a gut feeling that such assertion was true. He was therefore unable to react immediately. What had appeared to be a cohesive front was beginning to show signs of weakening. Additionally, Yandi got a different message from the others when she got home. The situation abruptly shifted once more. She read it numerous times, her face pinching as Tamar questioned him in addition to Yandi. It was unambiguous. Unquestionable facts, not rumors or conjecture. Once more, they select a date. All worries and hopes that this would end vanished in that instant, and those 3 words changed everything. Nobody could stop this because it was happening too quickly. Yandi thought to herself, that's what it is, as she carefully set her phone down. Her thoughts were racing, but her expression remained steady. There was just clarity, instead of bewilderment, for the first time since it all began. And that clarity was dangerous because when people realize exactly what they are dealing with, they stop reacting and start acting. And no one knew what Yandi would do next because she began to withdraw in a way that felt controlled, almost calculated. She stopped taking calls, texting, and responding in public instead of looking for answers or dealing with problems once more. This silence created another type of pressure that neither Mendeecees nor Tamar were ready for. Why is she so silent? It's not like her. Tamar examined him closely, her eyes narrowing slightly. Perhaps she's finished with the game, Mendy asks, pacing back and forth while holding his phone during a late-night discussion. This isn't a game. He caught himself controlling his tone after answering a bit too quickly. Do you get what I mean? Tamar spoke calmly and collectedly, saying, because it seems to me that you are the one who is confused. The term, confused, touched a deeper chord than he had anticipated, because he was experiencing it himself. The scenario had progressed faster than he had anticipated. Outside of their private chats, however, the public's reaction was growing more vocal and polarizing than before. Fans were horrified. The family was split due to intense emotions. Suddenly, it felt as though everything was becoming closer from every angle. One admirer said, Yandi is not deserving of this. The final comment gained popularity as people began to notice minute nuances, things that did not add up, and instances where Mendeecees appeared to change his energy depending on who he was with. At last, Tamar made her own decision, said someone else. He was taking both sides. He was seen standing next to Yandi in one video a few days earlier, looking solemn, guarded, and seemingly distant. In another, he was seen laughing with Tamar in a relaxed and obviously carefree manner. Which one is real? Inquired the fans. Inconsistency was the one thing that people found intolerable. Therefore, the question went viral. Meanwhile, an unforeseen but inevitable meeting was set up behind closed doors, with Yandi going in first. She was there to grasp what she already knew, or perhaps to confirm it. Her expression was unreadable, her stance stiff, and she wasn't there to dispute. Mendeecees showed there a short while after. His movements were slower than normal, his energies were strained, and the atmosphere entirely changed when Tamar intervened shortly after. At first, there was an unpleasant quiet because no one talked. Then Yandandi broke it. So this is the plan, she firmly stated, looking from one to the other. Are you still trying to figure out the puzzle? Without hesitation, Tamar said, we're not making any progress. What we want is already clear to us. Unreserved, direct, and unambiguous. Yandi nodded hesitantly, as though anticipating that response. And what precisely is that? Mendeecees started to speak, but Tamar took the initiative once more. A future that we can understand. Yandi turned to face him after muttering something to us. What part do I play in that? Above all, the message was conveyed by the reluctance. He hesitated. At last, he said, I'm trying to be honest with you. You would have told me before all of this if you were being sincere. Her speech suddenly took on a biting edge that prevented me from learning the same thing as everyone else, even if she was still composed. Even Tamar averted her gaze for a moment after that devastating blow. Do you believe I'll have no trouble doing this? There was a hint of irritation in Mendeecees' voice. Do you think this is what I wanted to happen? I think you made choices, Yandi immediately said. Instead of accepting responsibility for them, you are now attempting to explain them. Since that was the true problem, the term own hung in the air. Not only what occurred, but how it did so. Tamar took a small step forward and spoke in a forceful yet gentle tone. I'm not here to treat you badly. For the first time, Yandi gave her a serious look, but you did. Just a straightforward yet powerful statement. No dramatic gesture, no loud voice. Maybe in your eyes, Tamar answered. However, I won't apologize for anything that seems genuine to me. And there it was. The truth exposed. Put an end to concealing. Don't pretend any longer. With every second that went by, the room seemed smaller and the anxiety grew. Mendeecees rubbed his palms together, sensing the pressure from both sides. I didn't want the conversation to go like this. What did you want to accomplish? Yandi asked quietly. This was the conclusion you were going to come to. In my opinion, because it made him confront what he had been avoiding. The line drastically altered the atmosphere. This didn't happen right away. This was not an accident. Moment by moment, choice by decision. This was constructed over time. Now everything was colliding with one another. The world outside that room continued to observe, react, and anticipate what might come next. However, there was a final movement within. Yandi stood up and inhaled deeply before beginning. What do you think is the most bizarre? She spoke in silence. I'm no longer even shocked. Because surprise allows shock and denial, those remarks had greater impact than rage. However, this was acceptance. And acceptance indicated that she had already moved on. There was nothing to read as Tamar examined her intently, as though attempting to predict what would happen next. Nothing was being revealed by Yandi. What now? Mendeecees asked, in a deeper, more unsure voice than anyone had ever heard. Yandi took a moment to let him feel the weight of the question, but it wasn't because she didn't know the answer. You must now accept the consequences of your choice, she repeated softly before turning to face them both. Simple words with a finality that, given the lack of risk, changed everything once more. It was a choice, and choices have repercussions. Neither of them stopped her as she turned to leave the room. Above all, they both knew in their hearts that something had just ended, which is why that stillness spoke. However, something else had started at the same moment. Furthermore, they were unaware of how much more terrible and unexpected the scenarios